Hi guys and welcome. In this video I'm going to show you how you can improve the health of your wrists. But first I want to show you what exercises you shouldn't do. Now that you have seen what you shouldn't do, let's have a look at what I consider to be a good wrist training program. It's really important for you to understand the 4 movements that your wrists can do. Wrist extension, wrist flexion, moving the wrist towards the little finger is called ulnar deviation. Moving the wrist towards the thumb is called radial deviation. Now, because the wrist and forearms are highly connected, rotating the palm towards the ceiling, it's called supination of the wrists. Rotating the palm towards the floor is called pronation of the wrist. When trying to improve wrist health or mobility or range of motion, what I commonly see is people trying to improve wrist extension or wrist flexion, but it's very rare to see a proper assessment of the ability of the wrist to move laterally, performing a ulnar deviation, and medially, which is a radial deviation. So it's very important for us to scan our wrist's ability to get into those movements and range of motion. Find a base of support. It can be bricks, it can be a table, it can be a chair. Pronate your elbow and place the forearm on top of the support. Block it with the other hand. So the goal here is to not allow the elbow to borrow movement from the wrists. We want to keep it as honest as possible. So here we go. I'm gonna bring my arm into a radial deviation. I'm gonna go up into extension, outside towards the ulnar deviation, and down into a flexion. So that's one. If you do this properly, 4 reps is all you need. So again, radial, extension, ulnar, flexion, that's number 2. Before you move on to the other arm, you need to close your fists and do the same, laterally flexing, medially extending as much as possible. Laterally flexing, medially extending. Well, now we reverse it. A common error is that as you're circling, the elbow takes the movement of the wrist. So as you go in, you might notice your elbow going to the outside, you go up, the elbow goes down, and so on. So it's very important in this movement, as we're scanning the wrist, you don't want to move the elbow, you want to keep it as honest on the wrist as possible. So be aware of what your elbow is doing. That's why I really like this setup, as I can block my elbow from moving. Whereas if I was just free like this, you can see that my elbows are free to do whatever the hell they want. Before you move on to the other arm and do the 4 circles, first with open hand and then with closed fist, you will see that by just going into supination, placing the arm onto the support, doing the rotation is going to be so much harder. As you go through the circle, you don't have to allow your elbow to go into pronation or more supination. Block the forearm with the other hand and we go into ulnar, we extend, we go radial deviation, we flex. We go over to the other side, so radial deviation, extension, ulnar deviation, and flex. You can see that when I supinate my elbow, look how little radial deviation I have. So this is good for us to know, so it means there's room for improvement in that specific range of motion. Just complete one more. As I did in the pronated position, I'm gonna make my fist complete the same rotations in this second position.
I'm at the end of my radial deviation. I'm trying to squeeze the outside of my wrist to really contract and bring my wrist into more radial deviation.
Now, once you have scanned and seen where the mobility deficits or the pain zone is in your wrist, you can start moving on towards part 2 of this video. We're gonna move on from open kinetic chain to a closed kinetic chain movement. The starting position is on all fours. The shoulders are on top of the wrist, so you make sure you really load that wrist joint, and you're going to go towards one side, stay on the side, and go as far forward as you possibly can. Really put your weight forward. Pass through the middle, going to the other side, but you're still leaning forward, and then go back. You do 4 smooth circles on this side, and then you're gonna repeat by doing 4 smooth towards the other direction. If the rotations from all fours felt easy, you can progress them by doing a slightly harder variation and do the same movement from a plank. You're gonna shift all the weight towards one side, use your feet here to push against the floor and lean as far forward as possible. And then really clear those corners where you feel the tightness, going to the side here, going back. And again, 4 smooth circles each direction are plenty to feel the improvement in your wrists, mobility and strength. Close kinetic chain, ulnar and radial deviation. From all fours, go on your fists here. The first thing that you have to make sure is that your shoulders are on top of the wrist and you're not leaning back. So the weight is not on your hands, but is more towards your knees. Lean forward and load those wrists. From here, you squeeze the lateral part of your wrists and you try to send the thumbs towards the ground, keeping the elbows straight, really squeezing the lateral part of the wrists. And then you go back to a neutral position. As the shoulders go forward, you bend the elbows and you want to perform a radial deviation. So it doesn't really matter how much you bend the elbows here, but what matters is that with your wrist, you're trying to radial deviation and you're really trying to use these muscles plus the load of your body over the wrist to really stretch the lateral part of the wrist. You go forward, thumbs into the ground, go back to neutral, the shoulders go forward, so you keep the load at the wrist and you really do a radial deviations, pulling the thumbs towards your elbows, keeping the weight on top of the wrist. Roll it back, forward, open up the front of the wrist, going back. Here, we're opening up the back of the wrists. When this starts to become easier, what you can do to increase the load on the wrist is simply bringing your knees a little bit further away from your hands. Let's say you start on all fours and after 2 weeks you get very strong. By just bringing your knees a little bit further away from the hands, you will load the wrist much more. Make sure the weight is forward. Bring your thumbs to the floor. Open up the front of the wrist. going back to neutral, your shoulders go forward, you do the radial deviation, really pulling those thumbs towards your elbows, roll it back. When this sort of medium level position gets easy, you can try to do the same exercise from a plank position. Because this range is really neglected, I will advise you to start the practice one wrist at a time. So we're going to set up by flexing the wrist, placing the hand on the ground, and some of you won't even be able to straighten the wrist fully. You can just try to place the hand in this position and you try to bend the elbow and you try to straighten the elbow. You want to bend the elbow and try to straighten it until these front forearm muscles, they gain the necessary length to allow you to have the ability of handling weight load in this position here. Now, once this starts to become sort of comfortable, go for your rotation. So you're gonna go to one side, you're gonna lean back as much as you can, you're gonna slowly move towards the other side, you go forward, and you do 4 smooth rotation with your wrists in a flexed position. Once you get good with one hand, of course, you can upgrade this movement by going both arms. Try to place the hands as close to your knees as possible. So this will really have minimal weight on the wrists, and you try to do shifting on one side, going back, shifting over to the other side, forward. Smooth, controlled circles, and that will guarantee a nice stretch and an opening effect. You reverse it, you go to the other side, really working the corners that feel most restricted. After you complete this program, of course, you can play with wrist push-ups and all kinds of crazy exercises, but the goal of this video is to create a little bit of awareness that if you have zero ulnar or radial deviation, or you don't have the necessary flexion of your wrist to perform wrist flexion push-ups, it's useless that you try to perform push-ups if your joint is not ready for it. In part 3 of this video, we're going to have a look at strength training exercises you can do to improve the areas that need more work based on the assessment on the scan we performed in part 1. All you need to strength training your wrist the proper way is a dumbbell like this, adjustable dumbbell. You can put the external weight only on one side of, just like that. And then obviously you want to block the weight from getting off the dumbbell by using a collar. Just like that, you're gonna have what you need for your strength training. Grab the dumbbell from the top, the arm is by your side, the arm stays completely straight, and all you really have to do, focus on activating the lateral part of your wrist, all these muscles right here, and you just lift, control it for a second, bring it down, lifting up and control the way down. Now you want to use a load that it allows you to do 15 repetitions, and I want you to use that load until you build up your endurance up to 25 repetitions. Once you're able to do 25 reps with that load, it's time to go back to 15 using a heavier load. Grab it from the bottom, arm is to your side. You're gonna squeeze the medial side of your wrist and you're gonna bring that weight as high as possible. Hold it for a second, bring it down. Wrist extension is one of those movements that is commonly required in most training moves out there. For example, push-ups, handstands, front squat, anything that requires the hand to move in this way. To strength train these properly, I like to first address the end range extension, which is just this part here at the end of the range of motion, and then finishing off with traditional wrist extension with some external weight. You start on all fours, you lean back, and you stop until you can lift fingers and palm and you bring it down. Lift fingers and palm and you bring it down. You're basically strength training the end range of your wrists. What you can do is you lean forward and you make it a little bit harder for your fingers to lift off the floor, and that's gonna be a bigger and harder stimulus. What you want over time is for you to be able to build exact 90-degree wrist extension, and that's the requirement if you want to perform handstands, planche, anything that require the shoulders going past the wrist. If you have 90-degree wrist extension, it's just gonna make it easier on your joint. After you do your end range lifts off in extension, you're going to grab elevation. With your weight here, you want to start in a full flexed position, and then you want to work your extension, hold it for a second, control the way down. Extend the wrist, work it for a second, control the way down. Extend, hold it for a second, control the way down. And again, 15 repetition at first with a certain load, build up your endurance to 25 reps, and then go back to 15, increase the load, and start again. And making sure that all the weight is on the wrist, so you're actually leaning forward. You're going to drive your fingers into the ground as much as possible, and by applying this downward push with your finger and your forearm, you're gonna come up onto your index and medium finger, and then slowly, keeping the shoulders forward, you're gonna control the lowering of your palm back to the floor. Again, the weight is forward. I'm gonna drive the hands, the fingertips into the ground. I'm gonna lift my palm and control here. When I go down, the shoulders move forward and I control the palm going down. Again, you want to use high reps for this one, up to 25, but it's a hard one, so you may have to start with just 10 repetitions and build up your endurance until you are able to perform 25 of these slow and controlled repetitions. Okay, enough talking, it's time to practice. I'm going to write down your wrist health sequence, guys, and you can pause the video, go through the routine, and then let me know in the comments below how it went. Thanks guys for watching this video. I hope you find it helpful. Please make sure you hit that like button and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Get regular updates about proper training methods, joint mobility development, movement, strength training, and so on. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.